After 12 years of living in the same house, I finally made the decision to sell. It wasn't an easy choice, but my career was taking me to a different part of the state, and honestly, I was ready for a change. The house had been good to me. It was a nice 3-bedroom place in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Riverside Oaks, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns that the homeowners association made absolutely sure stayed that way. I'm a detective chief, though most of my neighbors had no clue what I actually did for a living. When people asked at neighborhood barbecues or chance encounters at the mailbox, I'd just say something vague like, "I work in law enforcement," and change the subject. I'd learned over the years that telling people your exact job tends to make things weird. Suddenly everyone's either asking you to look into their cousin's parking ticket, or they're nervous around you, like you're going to arrest them for jaywalking. So I kept my professional life private, and my neighbors seemed content with the mystery. The selling process started smoothly enough. I hired a good real estate agent, got the house listed, and within 2 weeks I had an offer. Not just any offer either, but a solid one, right at asking price. The buyers were a young couple in their late 20s, both teachers, excited about buying their first home together. They were eager, qualified, and their financing was already approved. Everything seemed perfect. That's when I learned about the HOA approval process. Now I'd been paying my HOA fees for over a decade, kept my grass cut, never painted my house a weird color, and generally stayed out of everyone's way. I figured the approval would be a formality. My real estate agent assured me it usually was. Just submit the paperwork, wait a week or two, get the rubber stamp, and move on to closing. I filled out all the forms, provided all the documentation they requested, and sent everything to the HOA board. Then I waited, and waited. The approval that should have taken 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. My buyers were getting anxious, worried they might lose their financing approval if things dragged on too long. My agent kept calling the HOA office, leaving messages that went unreturned. Finally, 6 weeks after submitting my application, I got a response. But it wasn't the approval I was expecting. It was a formal letter, printed on HOA letterhead, with an official-looking seal at the top. The letter was from Patricia Thornwood, the HOA board president, a woman I'd seen around the neighborhood but never really interacted with. She was probably in her late 50s, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting even when she was just checking her mail. The letter stated, in cold, bureaucratic language, that my sale had been denied. Denied. I read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding correctly. The reason given was failure to meet community standards requirements and concerns regarding buyer compatibility with neighborhood values. It was incredibly vague, and something about the wording made my detective instincts kick in immediately. The letter concluded by informing me that I was required to attend a special board hearing to discuss the matter further. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community center. Attendance was mandatory, the letter stressed, and failure to appear could result in additional fines and penalties. I called my real estate agent immediately. She was shocked. In her 15 years selling homes in this area, she'd never seen an HOA outright deny a sale approval, especially not with such flimsy reasoning. She suggested I might want to bring a lawyer to the hearing, which honestly should have been my first clue about how serious this was about to get. Thursday evening came around, and I walked into the community center meeting room. It was a small, fluorescent-lit space with a long table at the front and several rows of folding chairs facing it. Patricia was already seated at the center of the table, flanked by 3 other board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. She had a thick stack of papers in front of her and wore an expression that could only be described as smug satisfaction. I took a seat in the front row. There were a few other residents scattered around the room, apparently there to watch the show. Patricia waited until exactly 7 o'clock, then rapped her knuckles on the table like a gavel. "This special hearing is now in session," she announced, as if we were in an actual courtroom. "We're here to discuss the sale application submitted by Mr. Robert Chen for the property at 847 Maple Drive." She said my name with a particular emphasis, like she was pronouncing sentence on a criminal. I stayed quiet, waiting to hear what she had to say. In my line of work, I'd learned that sometimes the best strategy is to let people talk. They usually tell you everything you need to know if you just give them enough rope. "Mr. Chen," she continued, looking at me over her reading glasses. "The board has carefully reviewed your application, and we have serious concerns about approving this sale." "What concerns?" I asked calmly. She shuffled through her papers with exaggerated importance. "The prospective buyers, a Mr. David Miller and Ms. Lisa Washington, do not align with our community profile. We have standards here in Riverside Oaks, standards that have kept this neighborhood desirable for decades." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Can you explain what you mean by community profile?" Patricia's smile was thin and cold. "Riverside Oaks has a certain character, a certain type of resident who understands and appreciates our values. These buyers, while I'm sure they're perfectly nice people, don't quite fit what we're looking for." One of the other board members, a nervous-looking man named Greg, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. The other two board members stared at the table. "They're both teachers with stable jobs and excellent credit," I said. "They're pre-approved for their mortgage. What exactly doesn't fit?" Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand how this works. The HOA board has final approval authority over all sales. We have the right to reject any buyer for any reason we deem appropriate. It's in the bylaws." She tapped her stack of papers. "Section 12, paragraph 4, if you'd like to review it." "I'd like to know the specific reason for the denial," I pressed. Her expression hardened. "I've given you the reason. They don't fit our community standards. Now my recommendation is that you withdraw this sale and find more suitable buyers. Buyers who will be a better fit for Riverside Oaks." The way she said suitable made everything crystal clear. I'd been a detective for 23 years. I'd interviewed hundreds of people, and I knew exactly what Patricia was really saying without saying it directly. David Miller was white, Lisa Washington was black, and Patricia had a problem with that. I sat there for a moment, letting the full weight of what was happening settle over me. This woman, drunk on her tiny bit of power in this tiny kingdom, thought she could discriminate against my buyers, and there was nothing I could do about it. "What if I proceed with the sale anyway?" I asked. Patricia's smile turned predatory. "Then you'll be in violation of the HOA covenant. That's a $500 fine per day until compliance is achieved. Plus, we'll put a lien on your property, which will prevent the sale from going through anyway. You can't sell without our approval, Mr. Chen. So I suggest you start looking for new buyers, ones who are more appropriate." She stood up, clearly considering the matter closed. The other board members quickly gathered their things, avoiding eye contact with me. As I walked out of that community center, something had fundamentally shifted. Patricia thought she'd won. She thought she'd intimidated me into backing down. She had no idea that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because I wasn't just any homeowner. I was a detective chief with over 2 decades of experience investigating fraud, corruption, and every kind of illegal activity you could imagine. And Patricia Thornwood had just given me a case to work on. I went home that night and opened up my laptop. I had a lot of research to do. The next morning I did what I'd been trained to do for over 2 decades. I started digging. Not the casual kind of internet searching most people do, but the deep, methodical investigation that comes from years of detective work. I made myself a pot of coffee, sat down at my dining room table, and opened up my laptop. First, I needed to understand exactly what power Patricia actually had. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, all 63 pages of them, and started reading. Most of it was the standard stuff about lawn maintenance, parking rules, and architectural guidelines. But then I got to Section 12, the part Patricia had referenced in the hearing. She was technically right. The bylaws did give the board approval authority over home sales, but here's what she'd conveniently left out. That authority was supposed to be used only to verify that buyers could financially maintain the property and would follow community rules. There was nothing in there about community profile or suitable buyers. In fact, there was specific language stating that approvals could not be denied based on discriminatory reasons. Patricia had taken a legitimate procedural rule and twisted it into a weapon. That was my first red flag. Next, I started looking into Patricia herself. Public records are amazing things when you know how to find them. I discovered that Patricia had been the HOA president for 8 years, which seemed unusually long. Most people burn out on volunteer board positions after a year or 2. 8 years meant either she really loved the job, or she was getting something out of it beyond the satisfaction of community service. I pulled up the HOA's tax filings, which are public record for nonprofit organizations. The numbers were interesting. The HOA collected about $200,000 a year in fees from the 150 homes in our community. Most of that money should have gone to maintenance, landscaping, and the community center, but there were some line items that caught my attention. Consulting fees totaling $15,000 annually. Administrative expenses that seemed high. Special projects with vague descriptions. Now maybe these were all legitimate, but in my experience, vague accounting categories usually meant someone was trying to hide something. I made a note to dig deeper into the finances later. Then I started looking at past sale approvals in the neighborhood. This took some time, but I had access to real estate databases through a colleague who owed me a favor. I went back 5 years and pulled up every home sale in Riverside Oaks. There had been 43 sales during Patricia's tenure as president. I made a spreadsheet. On one side, I listed all the approved sales. On the other, I tried to find any that had been delayed or denied. The approved sales went through in an average of 12 days. Quick, efficient, no problems. But then I found 4 sales that had been significantly delayed, taking anywhere from 8 to 14 weeks to get approval. I started researching these buyers. This is where it got interesting. 3 of the 4 delayed sales involved minority buyers. One was an Asian family, one was a Hispanic couple, and one was a Black family. The 4th delayed sale was a same-sex couple. All of them had eventually been approved, but only after significant delays and what appeared to be additional scrutiny that other buyers didn't face. And then I found something else. 2 years ago, there had been a sale that was denied entirely. The house eventually sold to different buyers 3 months later. I managed to track down the original buyers through LinkedIn. They were a young Hispanic couple, both doctors. I sent them a careful message, identifying myself and asking if they'd be willing to talk about their experience with the Riverside Oaks HOA. The response came within an hour. Yes, they'd be happy to talk. In fact, they'd been hoping someone would ask. We arranged a phone call for that evening. The husband, Carlos, answered, and his wife, Maria, joined on speaker. They told me their story, and it was eerily similar to mine. Patricia had denied their application, citing the same vague community standards language. When they'd pushed back, she'd become hostile and suggested they wouldn't be comfortable in the neighborhood. They'd filed a complaint with the county, but nothing had come of it. Eventually, they'd given up and bought a house in a different community. We thought about getting a lawyer, Maria said, her voice tight with old anger. But we were young, it was our first house, and we didn't have money for a legal battle. We just wanted a home, you know? I knew, and I also knew that Patricia had been counting on exactly that response. She'd gambled that most people would back down rather than fight. Did you keep any documentation? I asked. Everything, Carlos said. Emails, letters, recordings of phone calls. We were so angry we saved it all. We just never knew what to do with it. I asked them to send me everything they had. They promised to email it that night. After we hung up, I sat back and looked at the pattern forming. This wasn't a one-time thing. Patricia had been doing this for years, using her position to discriminate against buyers she didn't think fit the neighborhood. She'd been careful about it, not denying everyone, just enough to maintain what she considered the right demographic makeup. And she'd been getting away with it because most people didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. The next day, I decided to do something that might be a little risky. I called David and Lisa, my buyers, and asked if they'd be willing to meet for coffee. They agreed immediately, probably hoping I had good news about the sale. When we met at a local coffee shop, I could see the stress on their faces. They were young, excited about their future, and this whole situation was clearly weighing on them. I need to ask you something, I said after we'd gotten our drinks. Has Patricia Thornwood contacted you directly? Lisa and David exchanged glances. David nodded slowly. Yeah, she called Lisa's cell phone about a week ago. How did she even get the number? What did she say? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. Lisa's expression hardened. She said she wanted to have a frank conversation with me. She told me that Riverside Oaks was a traditional community, and that we might not feel welcome there. She said David and I come from different backgrounds, and that mixed couples sometimes face difficulties in neighborhoods like theirs. She actually said that? Word for word, Lisa confirmed. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. Then she said that if we withdrew our offer, she'd help us find a more suitable neighborhood. One where we'd fit in better, David jumped in. When Lisa told me about the call, I wanted to call her back and tell her exactly where she could stick her traditional community. But our real estate agent said not to engage, that it might hurt our case. And did you record the call? I asked. No, I didn't think to, Lisa said, looking disappointed. It all happened so fast. But I can write down everything she said while it's still fresh, she added quickly. I have a good memory for conversations. It's only been a week. Do that, I told them. Write down every word you remember with as much detail as possible. Date, time, exactly what was said. Then I took a deep breath and made a decision. I need to tell you both something. I haven't been completely forthcoming about what I do for a living. I'm not just in law enforcement. I'm a detective chief. I've been working in investigations for over 20 years. Their eyes widened. David let out a low whistle. And right now, I continued, I'm investigating Patricia Thornwood. What she's doing isn't just wrong, it's illegal. It's housing discrimination, and it's a federal offense. I'm building a case against her, but I need your help. I need you both to document everything, save every email, every message, every interaction. Can you do that? Absolutely, Lisa said immediately, and David nodded in agreement. One more thing, I said. This might take a few weeks, maybe longer. Your financing might be at risk if we drag this out too much. If you need to walk away and find another house, I'll completely understand. David shook his head. No way, we love that house, sure. But this is bigger than that now. If this woman has been doing this to people for years, someone needs to stop her. Lisa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for fighting this. A lot of people would have just moved on. As I drove home from that meeting, my phone rang. It was my real estate agent, and she sounded stressed. Robert, I just got another letter from the HOA. Patricia is demanding you pay fines for failure to comply with board directives. She's claiming you owe $5,000 already, and the daily fines are still accruing. I smiled grimly. Patricia was escalating, trying to pressure me into backing down. She thought the mounting fines would scare me. What she didn't realize was that every move she made was just giving me more evidence. Don't worry about it, I told my agent. I'm not paying a single dollar. Let her keep sending letters. I want everything documented. That evening, I received the email from Carlos and Maria with all their documentation. As I opened the files and started reading through their experience, I felt that familiar sensation I got when a case was coming together. All the pieces were there. I just needed to keep pulling the thread until the whole thing unraveled. Patricia Thornwood had been running her little kingdom unchallenged for 8 years. She'd gotten comfortable, sloppy even. She thought she was untouchable. She had no idea what was coming. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the investigation like it was the most important case of my career. In a way, it was. This wasn't just about my house sale anymore. It was about stopping someone who'd been abusing their power and hurting people for years. I started with the finances. Following money trails is something I've done hundreds of times in my career. And HOA finances are surprisingly easy to access if you know where to look. Every homeowners association has to maintain records and make them available to members. So I sent a formal written request to the HOA office, citing the exact bylaw that gave me the right to review financial documents. Patricia tried to stall, of course. She sent back a response saying I'd need to schedule an appointment, fill out additional forms, pay a processing fee. All nonsense designed to discourage me. I sent another letter, this time CCing my attorney, pointing out that the bylaws required the documents to be provided within 10 business days of a written request. No appointment needed. No processing fee allowed. The documents arrived on day 9, probably because Patricia's own lawyer told her she had no choice. There were 5 years of financial statements, bank records, and receipts. I spread everything out on my dining room table and got to work. At first glance, everything looked fine. Income matched what you'd expect from HOA fees. Expenses seemed reasonable. Landscaping, pool maintenance, insurance, utilities for the community center. But when I started digging into the details, things got interesting. Those consulting fees I'd noticed earlier. $15,000 a year. Paid to something called Thornwood Community Solutions. It took me about 20 minutes of searching to discover that Thornwood Community Solutions was registered to Patricia's husband, Kenneth Thornwood. The company had been created 8 years ago, right after Patricia became HOA president. And as far as I could tell, this company had exactly one client, our HOA. So Patricia had created a system where the HOA paid her husband's company for consulting services. What services? The invoices were vague. Community assessment and planning. Strategic neighborhood development. Fancy words that meant nothing. This was just a way to funnel HOA money into her own household, but it got better. Or worse, depending on how you looked at it. I found payments to a property management company that didn't seem to actually manage any properties. More digging revealed that this company was owned by Patricia's sister. Another stream of money flowing to the Thornwood family. I added it all up. Over the past 5 years, Patricia and her family had extracted about $75,000 from the HOA through these various arrangements. Not enough to be obvious, but definitely enough to be illegal. This was embezzlement, pure and simple. I photographed every document, organized everything into a digital file, and backed it up in 3 different places. Then I started making phone calls. My first call was to an old colleague, Detective Rachel Kim, who worked in the Financial Crimes Unit. We'd worked together on a corruption case a few years back, and she was brilliant at untangling complicated money schemes. "Rachel, I need a favor," I said when she answered. "I've got what looks like embezzlement from a homeowners association, and I need someone to review my findings." "HOA drama?" She laughed. "Robert, I thought you dealt with serious crime." "This is serious. About $75,000 over 5 years. And there's housing discrimination involved too." Her tone changed immediately. "Send me what you've got. I'll take a look." My next call was to the Fair Housing Center, a nonprofit that handles discrimination complaints. I spoke with their legal director, a sharp woman named Jennifer who'd been doing this work for 15 years. I laid out everything I'd found: the pattern of delayed approvals for minority buyers, the denied sale to Carlos and Maria, the discriminatory phone call to Lisa. "This is textbook housing discrimination," Jennifer said. "The question is whether we can prove it in a way that'll hold up. The phone call to your buyer is good, especially if she documents it in detail. The pattern you've identified is compelling, and if you can find more victims, that strengthens the case significantly." "I'm working on that," I told her. And I was. I'd started reaching out to other residents, carefully feeling out who might have information. I didn't want to tip off Patricia that I was building a case, so I was subtle about it. A casual conversation at the mailbox here, a friendly chat at the grocery store there. That's how I met Tom and Vincent, a couple who lived 3 streets over. We'd never really talked before, just the occasional wave. But when I mentioned something vague about HOA issues, Tom's expression darkened. "Don't get me started on Patricia Thornwood," he said. "When we bought our house 4 years ago, she made the approval process a nightmare. We ended up talking for an hour in their driveway. They told me how Patricia had delayed their approval for 12 weeks, demanding additional documentation that no other buyers had to provide. How she'd called them in for multiple interviews, where she asked invasive questions about their lifestyle. How she'd finally approved the sale only after their lawyer threatened legal action. "We should have followed through with a complaint," Vincent said. "But honestly, we were just exhausted. We wanted to move into our house and move on with our lives." "I understand," I said. "But would you be willing to document what happened? Write it down, gather any emails or letters you still have?" They looked at each other, then nodded. "If it helps stop her from doing this to other people, absolutely." The more I dug, the more victims I found. There was Angela, a single black woman who'd bought a house in our community 3 years ago after a 9-week approval process that she described as humiliating. There was the Patel family, who'd been asked to provide additional financial documentation that wasn't required of other buyers. There was Chen, no relation to me, who'd been told his lifestyle might not fit the neighborhood because he ran a home business. Each person had their own story, but the pattern was clear. Patricia targeted anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of what Riverside Oaks should be, and she'd been doing it for years, confident that most people wouldn't fight back. I compiled all of this into a detailed report. Timeline, documentation, witness statements, financial evidence. It was the kind of case file I'd normally build for a major investigation. Except this time I was both the detective and the victim. Then I got a surprise ally from an unexpected place. Greg, one of the other HOA board members who'd been at that first hearing, showed up at my door one evening. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder like he was worried someone might see him. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I need to talk to you. We sat in my living room and Greg basically spilled everything. He'd been on the board for 3 years, he told me, and he'd watched Patricia operate with increasing concern. But she ran the board like a dictator. The other members were either intimidated by her or didn't want to rock the boat. I knew what she was doing was wrong, Greg said. The way she treated your buyers, the way she's treated other people over the years. But I didn't know how to stop her. She controls everything. The meetings, the agenda, the votes. She's even threatened board members who disagree with her. Threatened how? I asked. She dug up dirt on one guy who questioned her. Found out he'd had a bankruptcy 10 years ago and threatened to spread it around the neighborhood if he didn't fall in line. He resigned from the board a month later. Are you willing to go on record with this? Greg hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I am. I'm tired of being complicit. What she's doing is wrong, and someone needs to stop her. He gave me copies of board meeting minutes that Patricia had altered before filing them officially. He gave me emails where Patricia discussed strategies for delaying or denying approvals for buyers she didn't like. He gave me recordings of board meetings where Patricia had made discriminatory comments that were later edited out of the official minutes. It was a goldmine of evidence, delivered by someone on the inside who'd finally had enough. By the end of the 3rd week, I had built a case that would make any prosecutor jealous. Housing discrimination, embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power. I had documents, witnesses, financial records, and even an insider willing to testify. I sat at my dining room table one evening, looking at the stack of evidence I'd compiled, and allowed myself a small smile. Patricia thought she'd scared me off with her fines and her threats. She thought I was just another homeowner who'd eventually give up and go away. She had no idea what was about to hit her. It was time to make some calls. Not to Patricia, not yet. First, I needed to bring in the right people. The Fair Housing Authority needed to be involved. The district attorney's office needed to see the financial crimes. And I needed to coordinate everything so that when I finally confronted Patricia, I wasn't just an angry homeowner with complaints. I'd be coming with the full weight of the law behind me. I started making my list of who needed to be contacted, what evidence they each needed to see, and how to time everything perfectly. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure Patricia never did this to anyone else again. And it was about showing everyone that nobody, no matter how much power they think they have in their little corner of the world, is above the law. The endgame was coming. The morning I decided to make my move, I woke up with that familiar pre-operation feeling. You know the one, where you've done all the preparation, checked every detail twice, and now it's just time to execute. I'd felt it hundreds of times before raids, before arrests, before walking into interrogation rooms. But this time it was personal, and that made it different. I started making calls at 8 in the morning. First was Jennifer from the Fair Housing Center, who'd been reviewing my evidence for the past week. It's solid, she said. We have enough for a formal federal complaint. I'll have someone from our office there. Next was Detective Kim from Financial Crimes. I showed this to our white-collar division, she told me. They're very interested. We can have someone present, though we'll need to do our own follow-up investigation before any charges. Then I called my attorney, who'd been advising me throughout this whole process. You're sure you want to do this publicly? He asked. We could handle this more quietly. No, I said firmly. This needs to be public. Patricia's been operating in the shadows for years. It's time to drag everything into the light. Finally, I did something that felt both necessary and satisfying. I sent a formal request to the HOA board for an emergency meeting to discuss my sale approval. I cited the specific bylaw that allowed any homeowner to call for such a meeting. And I made sure to send it not just to Patricia but to all the board members individually, so she couldn't conveniently close to the request. Patricia's response came within an hour. She agreed to the meeting, probably thinking this was another chance to flex her authority and shut me down. She set it for that Thursday evening. Same time, same place as before. She probably figured it would be a repeat performance. Her sitting at the head table, me sitting in the audience. Her delivering her verdict while I had no choice but to accept it. She had no idea what I had planned. Thursday evening arrived. I showed up at the community center 30 minutes early. Patricia was already there, arranging her papers at the head table with that same self-important air. The other board members trickled in. Greg caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. Mr. Chen, Patricia said without looking up. I hope you're here to inform us that you've found new buyers, ones that meet our standards. Not exactly, I said calmly. I've brought some guests. They should be arriving shortly. She finally looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Guests? Right on cue, the door opened. Jennifer from the Fair Housing Center walked in, wearing a professional suit and carrying a briefcase. Behind her was Detective Kim, also in professional attire but with her badge visible on her belt. Then came my attorney, followed by another woman I'd never met before, who Jennifer introduced as a representative from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Patricia's face went from confused to alarmed. What is this? This is a closed board meeting. Actually, my attorney said smoothly, under the bylaws, any homeowner can bring representation to a hearing concerning their property. Mr. Chen is simply exercising that right. The other board members looked bewildered. One of them, a woman named Helen, started gathering her things like she was going to leave. Greg stopped her with a hand on her arm and whispered something. She sat back down, looking worried. More people started filing in. David and Lisa, my buyers. Carlos and Maria, the couple whose sale had been denied 2 years ago. Tom and Vincent. Angela, the Patel family. All the people Patricia had discriminated against over the years. They filled the front rows, a silent wall of witnesses. Patricia's confidence was cracking. This is highly irregular. I'm the board president, and I didn't authorize any of these people to attend. You don't need to authorize them, I said, still calm. This is about community business, and under the bylaws, any community member can observe board meetings. They're just here to watch. I walked to the front of the room, and instead of sitting in the audience, I stood facing the board table, facing Patricia. Before we begin, I said, I think there's something you should know about me, Patricia, something I've kept private for the 12 years I've lived here. My full title isn't just Mr. Chen. It's Detective Chief Robert Chen. I've been with the police department for 23 years. The last 8 as chief of detectives. The color drained from Patricia's face. Around the room I heard a few gasps from other residents who'd come to watch. For the past month, I continued, I've been conducting an investigation. Not a casual one, but the kind of thorough investigation I'd run on any major case. And what I've found is deeply disturbing. I pulled out my folder and started laying out documents on the table in front of the board. Let's start with housing discrimination. Over the past 5 years, you've systematically delayed or denied approval for minority buyers, while fast-tracking approvals for buyers you considered acceptable. You've violated the Fair Housing Act multiple times. Jennifer stepped forward. The Fair Housing Center has reviewed Detective Chen's findings. We'll be filing a formal federal complaint against you, Mrs. Thornwood, and against the HOA as an organization. Housing discrimination is a federal offense. Patricia started to speak, but I wasn't finished. Then there's the financial fraud. I laid out more documents. For 8 years, you've been funneling HOA money to companies owned by your family members. $75,000 in consulting fees to your husband's company for services that were never actually provided. Payments to your sister's property management company that doesn't manage any properties. This is embezzlement, Detective Kim spoke up. The Financial Crimes Division will be opening an investigation. What Detective Chen has provided us gives probable cause for a full audit of the HOA finances. Patricia found her voice, but it came out shaky. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. Everything I've done has been for the good of this community. Really? I pulled out another document. Then explain this email from 6 months ago where you told another board member, and I quote, "We need to keep the neighborhood the right kind of people. Too much diversity destroys property values." Should I read more? Greg cleared his throat. I can confirm that email is real. I received it. And there are others. Patricia whirled on him. You're betraying the board? After everything I've done for this community? You mean after everything you've done to this community? Greg shot back, his voice stronger now. I'm done being part of this. I've watched you discriminate against good people for years, and I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner. Helen, the other board member, raised her hand timidly. I'd like to make a motion. I move that we immediately approve Mr. Chen's sale to David Miller and Lisa Washington. Second, Greg said instantly. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. You can't do this without my approval. I'm the president. My attorney smiled. Actually, they can. Any 3 board members constitute a quorum and can vote. You're being outvoted, Mrs. Thornwood. All in favor? Helen said, her voice gaining confidence. 3 hands went up. Greg, Helen, and the third board member, a quiet guy named Frank who'd barely spoken at the first meeting but now looked determined. "The motion passes," Helen announced. "The sale is approved." David and Lisa grabbed each other's hands. Lisa had tears in her eyes. Around the room, the other victims of Patricia's discrimination started clapping. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. "This isn't over. I'll sue all of you. I'll fight this." The HUD representative stepped forward. "Mrs. Thornwood, I'd strongly advise you to consult with an attorney before making any more statements. You're facing potential federal civil rights violations which carry significant penalties. Anything you say right now could be used against you." I watched as reality crashed down on Patricia. Her face went through a series of expressions: anger, denial, fear, and finally something that might have been understanding. She'd pushed too far, hurt too many people, and finally met someone who knew how to fight back. "I'm resigning from the board effective immediately," she said quietly, "and I won't fight the sale approval. You're also going to need to repay the money you took from the HOA, Detective Kim added. "All of it with interest. That's non-negotiable if you want any chance of avoiding criminal charges." Patricia grabbed her papers with shaking hands and walked toward the door. She paused when she reached me, and for just a moment I thought she might apologize. Instead, she just said, "You had no right to investigate me like this." "Actually," I replied, "I had every right. You broke the law, multiple laws, and you hurt people who were just trying to buy homes and live their lives. Someone needed to stop you." She left without another word. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in conversation. David and Lisa rushed over to thank me, both talking over each other in their excitement. Carlos and Maria introduced themselves in person, thanking me for doing what they couldn't. Other residents came up to shake my hand, some apologizing for not standing up to Patricia sooner. Greg approached me last. "Thank you," he said. "I should have done something years ago." "I'm sorry I didn't." "You did something when it mattered," I told him. "That's what counts." As people started filing out, Jennifer pulled me aside. "The formal complaint will be filed next week. Even with her resignation, we're moving forward. This needs to be on record so it doesn't happen again." I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. This wasn't just about getting my sale approved. It was about making sure the next family who wanted to buy a home in Riverside Oaks wouldn't face the same discrimination. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just satisfaction from closing a case, but genuine pride. I'd used my skills, my knowledge, and my position to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's what being a detective was supposed to be about. Patricia Thornwood's reign over Riverside Oaks was over, and justice finally had been served. The weeks following that board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread through Riverside Oaks faster than I'd expected. Within days, everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. I became something of a local celebrity, which was both flattering and a little uncomfortable. I'd spent 12 years being the quiet guy who kept to himself, and suddenly people were stopping me everywhere to talk. Some neighbors apologized for not speaking up when they'd noticed Patricia's behavior over the years. Others thanked me for exposing what had been happening. A few people, Patricia's friends mostly, gave me cold looks and crossed the street when they saw me coming. But honestly, I was okay with that. If standing up against discrimination meant losing the approval of people who supported it, that was a price I was willing to pay. The legal aftermath moved surprisingly quickly. Patricia's attorney reached out to my attorney within a week of her resignation. She'd agreed to repay the full amount she'd embezzled, $47,000 in cash with another $28,000 paid over the next 2 years with interest. In exchange, the HOA board agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the financial crimes. "She's getting off easy," Greg told me over coffee one morning. He'd become something of a friend through all this. "She should face criminal charges." "Maybe," I said. "But this way the HOA gets its money back faster. And she's still facing the federal housing discrimination complaint. That's not going away." And it wasn't. The Fair Housing Center filed their formal complaint, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development opened an investigation. Patricia hired a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases, which probably cost her more than what she'd stolen in the first place. The case would likely take years to fully resolve, but she was already facing significant consequences. Her reputation was destroyed. Her husband's consulting company lost its only client and eventually shut down. And from what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, They were considering moving out of state to escape the stigma. Part of me felt a little bad for her. Not much, but a little. She'd built this situation herself through years of discrimination and abuse of power. But watching someone's life fall apart is never pleasant, even when they deserve it. The HOA itself went through a complete transformation. After Patricia's resignation, the remaining board members held an emergency election. Greg became the new president, which everyone agreed was a good choice. He immediately implemented new policies requiring board transparency, financial audits, and clear, non-discriminatory criteria for sale approvals. No more vague community standards nonsense, Greg announced at the first meeting under his leadership. From now on, if buyers are financially qualified and agree to follow the basic rules, they're approved. Period. The board also voted to hire an independent property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, removing the temptation for any one person to have too much control. They brought in an accountant to review the books going forward, and they established a community oversight committee where any resident could raise concerns about board decisions. It was everything an HOA should have been from the start. My sale moved forward, without any further obstacles. David and Lisa's financing came through, and we set a closing date for 6 weeks after the dramatic board meeting. In the meantime, they came by the house a few times to measure rooms and plan their move. Watching their excitement made everything I'd gone through feel worthwhile. "We still can't believe you did all this," Lisa said one afternoon while we were standing in the backyard. "You could have just walked away, found a different buyer who Patricia wouldn't have blocked." "I could have," I admitted. "But that wouldn't have solved the real problem. Patricia would have just done the same thing to the next person, and the person after that. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight even when it's not the easy path." David shook his head in amazement. "I'm just glad you turned out to be a detective chief and not like an accountant or something." "No offense to accountants," I laughed. "I think an accountant could have caught the financial fraud just as easily. But yeah, the investigative experience definitely helped." As we got closer to closing, I started packing up my house. 12 years of life doesn't fit into boxes as easily as you'd think. Every room held memories. The living room where I'd worked countless cases late into the night. The kitchen where I'd hosted exactly 3 dinner parties because I was never much of a social person. The backyard where I'd spent quiet evenings reading and trying to decompress from difficult days at work. But I was ready for the change. The promotion that had started this whole process was a good opportunity, a chance to lead a larger department in a city that needed experienced leadership. And after everything that had happened with the HOA situation, I was ready for a fresh start somewhere new. Closing day arrived on a sunny Friday morning. We met at the title company, signed what felt like 100 documents, and just like that, the house was no longer mine. David and Lisa got the keys, and we all shook hands outside the office. "You'll take good care of the place," I said. It wasn't a question. "Absolutely," David promised. "And we'll make sure to tell everyone who'll listen about what you did, about how you stood up to discrimination and won." They invited me to stop by any time I was back in town, and I promised I would. Though we all knew it was the kind of promise people make when they're saying goodbye and probably won't actually see each other again. Life moves forward. I spent my last few nights in town at a hotel. On my final evening, I decided to take a drive through Riverside Oaks one more time. The streets were quiet, lit by street lamps and the warm glow from house windows. I drove past the community center where everything had gone down, past Patricia's house, which looked dark and empty, past the homes of all the people who'd helped me build the case against her, and finally I drove past my old house. David and Lisa were already moved in. I could see them through the front window, hanging pictures on the wall and laughing about something. The house looked alive in a way it hadn't in years, filled with the energy of a young couple starting their life together. I felt a tap on my car window and nearly jumped. It was Greg walking his dog. I rolled down the window. "You scared me," I said with a laugh. "Sorry," he grinned. "I saw your car and wanted to say goodbye." "You're leaving tomorrow?" "Early morning," I confirmed. "Well, thank you for everything. The neighborhood is better because of what you did. We've already had 2 more sales go through and both were approved in under a week. No drama, no discrimination, just straightforward business like it should be." "That's good to hear," I said, and I meant it. "You know," Greg continued, "I've been thinking about everything that happened. Patricia had power for 8 years. She hurt a lot of people in that time, but it only took one person willing to stand up to her to bring it all down. That's pretty remarkable. It wasn't just me, I reminded him. It was Carlos and Maria who kept their documentation. It was you deciding to speak up. It was all those other people willing to share their stories. One person can start something, but it takes a community to finish it. Greg nodded thoughtfully. I guess that's true. Still, you're the one who put it all together. You're the one who knew how to build a case and fight back. Most of us wouldn't have known where to start. We talked for a few more minutes, then said our final goodbyes. As I drove away from Riverside Oaks for the last time, I thought about what Greg had said. About one person making a difference. The truth is, I'd spent my entire career trying to make a difference. Solving cases, catching criminals, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Some days I felt like I was making progress. Other days it felt like I was fighting an endless battle against an ocean of problems. But this case, this one involving a power-hungry HOA president and families just trying to buy homes, this one felt different. I could see the direct impact. I could see the changes that resulted from standing up against injustice. The reforms in the HOA, the families who could now buy homes without discrimination, the message sent that abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated. Maybe that's what justice really is. Not the big dramatic courtroom victories you see in movies, but the small battles fought by regular people who decide that enough is enough. The people who see something wrong and choose to do something about it, even when it's difficult and messy and complicated. I'd started this whole thing just wanting to sell my house and move on with my life. I'd ended up taking down a system of discrimination that had been hurting people for years. Sometimes life surprises you like that. Sometimes the universe puts you in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to make a difference. As I pulled onto the highway, heading toward my new city and my new job, I felt genuinely good about leaving, not just because I'd won my battle with Patricia Thornwood, but because I was leaving the neighborhood better than I'd found it. And really, isn't that all any of us can hope to do? Leave things a little better than we found them. Stand up when we see injustice. Use whatever skills and knowledge we have to protect people who need protecting. Patricia had thought her little kingdom was untouchable. She'd thought that having authority in a small community meant she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. She'd learned a hard lesson about the difference between power and justice. And me. I'd learned that sometimes the most important cases aren't the ones in the headlines or the ones that come with medals and commendations. Sometimes the most important cases are the ones that help regular people live their lives with dignity and fairness. I never saw Patricia Thornwood again. I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband eventually moved to Arizona. The federal case against her settled out of court, with her paying additional fines and attending fair housing training. It wasn't the dramatic downfall some people hoped for, but it was justice nonetheless. David and Lisa sent me a Christmas card that year, with a photo of them in front of the house. They looked happy. That was enough for me. As for Riverside Oaks, the last I heard, it was thriving under new leadership. More diverse families were moving in. The community,